Wow, huge congratulations! You're starting your third day of learning JavaScript. This is a big step forward in your career. In this episode, you'll learn about one of the most important concepts in programming: functions. Functions are commonly used, and understanding them will expand your ability to write even more complex programs. If you're ready, let's start, because there's much to discuss. Let's start with understanding what functions are. To explain this, let's go back to the example from the lesson about loops, where we send out invitations. We used loops to avoid rewriting the same code over and over, right? Functions are similar in saving us time. With functions, we also don't need to rewrite the same code. How it works? Here's an example. Imagine you're organizing a party and you need to send invitations. Last time we used a loop to send invitation to multiple people. With a function, we can pack this loop inside a box and reuse it whenever needed without rewriting the same code again. Think of it as creating a mini program. You can create a function to do some jobs from A to Z. What's important to remember is that functions should do one job only. This means each function shouldn't have more than one goal. This makes functions easier to understand, test, and reuse. For example, a function that sends invitations should only handle sending invitations, not planning the entire party. Remember our lesson on variables? Variables have a keyword like let or cons, followed by a name and a value assigned to it, which we store in this variable like in a box. Functions have similar components. They also start with a keyword, which is function. They also have a name. Functions are also like boxes, but we can keep entire code blocks here. With variables, we store simple things like strings, numbers, booleans, or arrays. In functions, we store a whole code block that can do some actions. For example, all the code needed to send invitations can be packed into a box called send invitations. Now we can use it multiple times later without having to rewrite the same code over and over. Just write it once and then all you need to remember is the function name. Cool, right? When it comes to functions, we need to understand the difference between defining a function and calling it. Defining a function is simply packing a block of code into a box. You can write anything you want here. Create variables, loops, if-else statements, whatever you need. But to use the function, you must call it. How? Simply write the function name, followed by parentheses, and end with a semicolon. When you do this, the code within the function will run. It might sound simple, but believe me, forgetting to call a function is a common reason for sleepless nights and hours of debugging code. It's a mistake that happens very often. Now it's time for your first task. I have prepared some function examples. You see them on the screen right now. Remember everything you've learned so far and try to correct all of them. Each one has some mistake to fix. Pause the video and think about the solution for each function. And how did it go? Let's go through all the functions together and see what's wrong with them. In the first example, everything looks quite good, except for one important detail. The keyword function is missing, right? In the second example, one of the curly braces is missing. The function won't work without it. In the next function, another important element is missing. This time it's the parentheses. And finally, the last function is a complete mess. It almost looks like a variable setup. It lacks curly braces and has an unnecessary equal sign. Now it looks much better. Were you able to correct all the functions? Now let's move to another important feature of functions. They can use parameters. Let's return to our birthday example. We can make this function more flexible. This time it's about Emily's birthday party, for example. However, Emily's friend Zoe also wants to use this function for her own party. They have different friends, so their friends list will be different. How can we adapt it? We can put parameters inside the parentheses when we define the function. We give them names to make them easier to reference later. Then, when calling the function, we place a specific value inside the parentheses, such as the array of guests. We call these values provided here arguments. This way, inside the function, we can use this information to send invitations to the proper list of friends. The best way to explain this is to show you how it works in a JavaScript file. I'll declare the entire send invitations function, as in the example, with a guest list parameter. Perfect. Now I'll create an Emily's guest list, including Alice, Bob, and Charlie. After that, it's time to call the function. This way, I pass my guest list into the function as an argument. Inside it, a for loop runs through my list. As a result, I should see 3 messages with my friends' names. Alice, you're invited. Bob, you're invited. And Charlie, you're invited. And as you can see, it works. This is an example using Emily's friends list. Let's make another example for Zoe. Zoe's friends are Jack, John, and Kate. Let's create another array, Zoe guests this time. I will do the same as before. I will call the send invitations function again, but this time with a different argument. As a result, we send invitations to Jack, John, and Kate. Again, inside the function, we use the same for loop, but on a different array. Thanks to the parameters, you don't have to write different code for each friends list. Cool, right? You can also include more than one parameter in a function. Just separate them with commas. We can expand this function by adding another parameter for the host's name, making the function even more flexible. We might set Emily's name to Emily and Zoe's to Zoe. We have the same function, but thanks to parameters, it's more customized to specific people. Great, right? It is important, however, to always match the number of values you provide when calling the function to the number of parameters you've defined. If you miss some values, it will be a problem. Let's see what happens with this function when we don't put any guest list as an argument. I updated this function in the script.js file and called it without any argument. Now let's check the console to see what the effect is. Look, that doesn't look good, does it? How can we deal with this? We can solve this by setting a default parameter value, which we specify after an equal sign. This way, if we don't specify a guest list when calling the function, it will use the default one, which prevents errors. Let's verify if it indeed displays a default guest list without errors. After the equal sign, I provide a default parameter value and save the file. Yes, the console displays the correct message without any errors this time. What else is important to know about functions? There are several key points and we'll discuss them one by one. First, in JavaScript, there's a concept known as scope. This concept defines where in your code you can access variables or functions. Today you learn about two main types of scope, global and local. As an example, any variables and functions that we've written until now are accessible in the global scope. If I create a variable in the code, I can access it everywhere. Even if I create a function later and want to use that variable within the function, I can do it. The variable was created in the global scope. Imagine a social media post. You post about your favorite song and set it to be visible to everyone. This is an example of global scope. Everyone can see what your favorite song is. Let's check how it works in the console. I create a variable, let's say favorite song. When I want to display it, using console.log, the text appears in the console. Everything works correctly. When I create a test function and want to display this variable inside it, I can do it. The favorite song variable is available everywhere. However, thanks to functions, we can create a local scope. This means the variables you create inside the function are unavailable outside it. This way you can create secret private things that cannot be used outside the function. In this case, imagine that on social media you want to post a message that you want to share only with friends. You want it to be invisible to everyone else. Now let's see how this works. I'll write this function in the console. Done. Now, when I call it, I get the information about the secret. I created this variable inside the function and displayed it in the console. But now I will type console.log with the secret variable outside of the function and see what happens. This variable is only available inside the function. Outside of it, it seems like it doesn't exist. Now let's discuss another great feature of functions. Until now, we have mainly used functions to display something on the console. But functions can do so much more. Imagine you have a magic box that can transform anything you put into it into something else. You give it an apple and it returns an apple pie. The box takes something you give it, does its magic inside, and then hands back something new based on what you put in. In programming, a function works like this magic box. You give it some information as arguments, it does its magic inside with that information, and then it gives back a result, the output or return value. For example, a function that takes two numbers does its magic inside, which in this case means adding the numbers together, and gives us back that sum through the return keyword. By default, a function doesn't return anything, or more precisely, it returns an undefined value. We must use the return keyword to return specific information. Why is this useful? You can save the value returned by a function in a variable, and then use that information to do something practical. Imagine you and your friends want to go to the movies. Tickets are $12 each. We'll write a function that calculates the total cost based on the number of tickets needed. We provide the number of tickets we wish to buy as a parameter, and the function calculates and returns the total cost. Why is this useful to return this information? It allows us to use this data later in our code. Now you can display the result to the user like we did with console.log. You can also make decisions based on the result, like checking if you have enough money to purchase the tickets. What's more, you can use the result in further calculations, such as applying a discount or calculating the total cost including snacks. What happens if I remove the line with the return keyword? Let's check. Now I'll show my total cost on the console. This time, the function returned undefined. Sure, it did the math, but how useful is that if we don't get the result? The return keyword is required to take this information out of the function. I covered everything about functions I wanted to share with you. Functions are almost everywhere in code. If there's one most important thing to remember from this course, it's how to create and use functions. I've got a great exercise for you to end with. We'll keep with the theme of planning events. Your challenge is to create a simple function that calculates the cost of your next party. You just need to provide two things to the function: the number of guests and how much you want to spend on each guest. These are your function parameters. Inside the function, you write code that calculates the total by multiplying the number of guests by the cost per guest. Store the function's return in a variable and then display it in the console. For example, imagine you want to know how much it would cost to invite 10 friends to your party, and you're planning to spend $50 on each friend. This function will quickly calculate that for you and tell you you need to spend $500. After you write your function, try changing the numbers in the parameters to see different total costs. For example, what if you invited 5 friends and spent $60 on each? It's a great way to practice and ensure everything works well. Remember, don't worry if this feels a bit tricky at first. It's all about practice. If you get stuck, that's completely okay. Getting used to new things takes a little time, but I want you to try it at least. Are you ready? Let's get started. Okay, what's the solution? I created a function called calculate party cost. It takes two parameters, the total number of guests and how much you spent on each one. Inside the function, I multiplied the number of guests by the cost per guest to find the total amount. I saved the result in the total cost variable. After that, I put a return keyword with a total cost variable. This way, I can see this value outside the function. In the next step, I saved this returned value to the total party cost variable outside the function. And lastly, I displayed it on the console. Okay, we covered some essential concepts about functions. Here are the key takeaways to remember. Functions are reusable blocks of code that save time and effort. They help you avoid rewriting the same code over and over. Functions start with the function keyword, followed by a name, parentheses, and code block within curly braces. A best practice is to make sure each function does one job only. This makes function easier to understand, test, and reuse. Functions can take parameters to make them more flexible. For example, we used a parameter for a guest list to send invitations. You can set default values for parameters to avoid errors when not all parameters are provided. Defining a function means writing it, while calling a function means executing it. Remember to call your function so it runs. Variables created inside the function are local and can't be accessed outside of it. Variables created in global scope can be used anywhere in the code. Functions can return values using the return keyword. This allows you to save the result in a variable and use it later. And lastly, I displayed it on the console. And that's all in this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Now I invite you to another exciting topic we'll cover today. We will talk about the document object model. See you soon! You've already mastered the basics of JavaScript. Now get ready for an even more exciting series of lessons. Why? Because we will combine all three web development superpowers: JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. This will allow us to create some really cool effects on a web page and prepare you to add interactive features to your portfolio project. However, we need to start with the basics. I'll explain the DOM, the document object model, in this episode. Then you'll learn how to access elements on the page so you can do something fun with them in JavaScript. You'll also learn about two important objects of the DOM: document and window, and why they are so important. In the next episode, you'll expand your knowledge about DOM manipulation even further. We'll also write some functions to change elements in the DOM tree. And of course, a homework exercise will be waiting for you at the end of the day. So let's start by talking about the DOM. What is it? You might remember it from learning HTML basics, which I called the HTML document tree. When you create a website using HTML, you're creating a structure. This HTML can be pictured as a document tree, where each HTML element is a part of it. It's like a family tree when the HTML element is a grandparent, the head and body are children of HTML, and so on. Once you run the website on the browser reads HTML code and creates its own version of this tree. It's a map of all elements like headings, paragraphs, etc. This map is what we call the document object model. It tells the browser exactly where to find any website element. We can also present it as a tree, but it is full of objects this time. Every part of a website is converted to an object in DOM: the paragraph, the title element, and so on. Thanks to the DOM, we can find and modify elements on the website using JavaScript code. We can remove, change, or even add new ones. But before we continue, let's shortly talk about objects in JavaScript. An object is a type of data that can hold many different kinds of values and functions. We won't go into too much detail about objects in this course, but it's important to remember that objects are very important data types in JavaScript. But it's also more complex than the types you've learned, like arrays, booleans, or numbers. The most important thing to remember is that objects have methods and properties. We use a dot followed by the object property or method name to access them. What's more, we have two additional things in DOM: our map of elements. We don't create them, they are automatically added to the tree of every page. These are the document object and the window object. The window object is your browser window, and the document object is the entire content of that window, including the entire web page. These objects are incredibly important when working with JavaScript because they contain many useful properties and methods. Properties, as you might remember, gives us some information, while methods do some actions. Now you might be thinking, okay Aga, this all sounds great, but we didn't create any document or window objects in our project. Our HTML code starts with doctype and the HTML element. Are you sure the document and window are in our project too? Let's check this in the console. I'll type document and hit enter. Look, there's an element with a URL. When I expand it, the page's HTML code is inside. It gets even more interesting when I type window and hit enter. Look at this. You can see all the methods and properties available for the window object. There are many of them. Among others, there are properties like inner height and inner width, showing the height and width of the browser window. Oh, and look! We also have the alert method. This is how we displayed information in a pop-up on the page. As you can see, methods have a little orange F symbol next to them. It's all functions. All these properties and methods can be used in JavaScript. You can access them by writing their names after a dot. If you type window dot in the console, a pop-up will show all the methods and properties as a hint. Of course, you won't be learning all of them today. I'll give you a few hints about which ones we'll use to change elements on the page. Okay, now it's time to start manipulating something on the page. But first we need to find some elements using JavaScript. To access a specific element on the page, we use the query selector method. It's a method of the document object, so we need to include its name too. We also create a variable to store this element. We can use selector names, class names, and IDs to select a specific element. When we want to select an element by its ID, we need to start writing the ID with a hash, and when using a class, with a dot. The entire selector is written in quotes. Another important method is query selector all. This is extremely useful when you want to select all elements of a certain type, like all paragraphs on the page. The query selector method will select the first paragraph on the page. To select all, we use query selector all. It gives us something called a node list. A node list is similar to an array. You can look through it and do things with each element. For example, you could change the text or style of every paragraph on the page. Just remember, A node list isn't exactly an array, so it doesn't have every array method, but it works perfectly for looping. Here I want to mention 3 additional methods. You'll often find them in code, so it's good to know what they are. These additional methods are getElementById, getElementsByClassName, and getElementsByTagName. Their names explain what they are for. The first one helps to select an element by its ID, the second by its class name, and the third by its tag name or selector. Compared to them, the query selector and query selector all methods are much more universal. You can use them for any element, whether you want to access it by selector, class, or ID. Okay, it's time for some practice. Let's start by explaining how to access a specific element on the page in JavaScript. I'll provide an example. I'll create a simple page in CodePen with one heading, one paragraph, and one button. Now pay attention. Let's say I want to select the h1 element and then change its content. How do we do that? To select the element, I'll use a common and recommended document object method, querySelector. I'd also like to put the h1 element in a variable. So in the JavaScript section, I'll first create a variable. Let's call it title. Next, I assign document.querySelector as its value. In the parentheses, we specify which element we are interested in. You can enter a specific selector here, but you can also use an ID or class. It's important to put this in quotes. Let's display the title variable in the console to see what we have. In CodePen, I recommend clicking the console button. A window will then appear displaying the console's contents. Look! We have the h1 element with the text inside and the opening and closing tags. We have the entire title in the variable. That's what we wanted. Now it's time for some magic. We can change the title text. To change the text, we'll use the text content property. This time we apply it to the element we want to change. Let's first see what shows up as a text content of the title element in the console. This time it's the title text without the opening and closing h1 tags, just the content inside. Now let's overwrite it. I'll write title.textContent and assign it a new value. Let's say I changed this title. Look at that! This way I changed the title text. The old text is gone. See, even if I go to the inspector and check the code, the h1 element now has the text I changed this title. Super cool, right? And this is just the beginning of what JavaScript can do with element manipulation. You've just learned the first way to manipulate an element, changing the text by changing the text content property. We assigned a new value to this property, and thanks to this, a completely different heading appeared on the page than the one written in HTML. What's more, we can also change the styles of elements using JavaScript. We use the style property for this. Let me show you some examples in CodePen. I'll now remove the previous code, leaving only the title variable. Let's check what appears in the console if I enter the style property. Look, we have a list. In the CodePen console, it's cut off, so I'll show you in the inspector. It will be clearer here. Here we have access to all the styles of this element. Of course, there are CSS styles. See for yourself, there are familiar names like border, background color, color, font family, and so on. By overwriting these properties, we can change the styles of the element. Let's change the color, for example. I type title.style.color and set it to red. And indeed, the title color changes to red. In the console, when we check the style list again, this time we see a red color next to the color property. Using the style property, we can freely change the styles of elements. Here are a few examples on the slide. In the first one, just like we did a moment ago, we change the element's color and this time to white. In the next example, we change the background color to black. We write names using hyphens between words in CSS, but in JavaScript, we write them in camel case. If you write the background color with a hyphen between the words, the code won't work. It's important to remember this. In the next example, we change the padding to 10 pixels. As you can see, both the number and the pixels are written in quotes. I hope these examples have helped you understand how to change element styles in JavaScript. In the next video, we'll focus more on practice, so this will become even clearer. Now let's practice what you've learned. I've prepared an initial HTML code for you in CodePen. You will find the link under this video. Your task is to make the following changes using JavaScript. Change the text of the paragraph to JavaScript is awesome. Change the background color of the button to blue. And increase the font size of the heading to 36 pixels. Use your new knowledge about DOM manipulation and good luck. I'm sure you can do it. Pause the video and get to work. Alright, let's go through the steps to solve this exercise. In number 1, first we need to select the paragraph element. We can use the query selector method for this. Then we'll change its text using the text content property. Next, in number 2, we select the button element. We'll change its background color using the style property. And finally, in number 3, we select the heading element. We'll change its font size using the style property. That's all for now, Coder Woman. In this lesson, you learned about the document object model and its importance in web development. The DOM is like a map, allowing us to find and interact with specific parts of a web page. You explored how to access elements using methods like query selector and query selector all. You also learned how to manipulate these elements by changing their text content and styles using properties like text content and style. Finally, you practiced these skills with an exercise helping you understand DOM manipulation in JavaScript. Congratulations on completing this lesson. In the next video, we'll dive even deeper into DOM manipulation. Get ready and see you there! Welcome back. Now that you've learned the basics of the DOM, it's time to dive deeper and explore some more advanced techniques. Today we'll cover how to manipulate the DOM by changing attributes, creating and deleting elements, and working through some practical examples. Let's get started. Before we dive into new material, let's do a quick review. Remember how we used text content to change the text inside an element? We also applied some basic styles like font size and color. What's more, you can also change other element styles like border, padding, or even width and height. You just need to write the correct property name. And of course, we manipulate DOM using query selector and query selector all methods. Right now, you're able to change many elements' properties. You can completely change their look and content. This is already a big achievement. But let's move further and see what else you can do with JavaScript. First, let's talk about attributes. We can add, change, or remove attributes using the setAttribute, getAttribute, and removeAttribute methods. I hope you remember from previous lessons what attributes are. If not, let me remind you. Attributes are extra values we can give to elements. For example, using the href attribute, we can specify where a link will take us when we click it, or what image will be displayed as an img element. For this, we use the src attribute, right? These are attributes, and we can change, add, or remove them with JavaScript. I've already mentioned the methods that let us manipulate attributes: setAttribute, getAttribute, and removeAttribute. The first one is used to add or change an attribute. The second one, getAttribute, allows us to find an attribute's current value. The last one is used to remove an attribute. Let's check how they work with an example on CodePen. First, I create two HTML elements, an image and a link. As you can see, I've prepared elements with several attributes. The image has ID, src, and alt attributes. The link has ID, href, and target. Each of these attributes should already be familiar to you. If not, you now see a short explanation of each on the screen. If needed, pause and read all the descriptions. The anchor tag contains a completely fictional link, example.com. Take a look at what I entered for the image. Here it's placeholder.com. After the slash, I added the number 150. Keep this address in mind. It's useful when you need to use a placeholder, which is a temporary image. It looks like a gray square. The number 150 specifies its width and height in pixels. If I needed a larger placeholder, I would enter a larger number, like 500. Placeholders are useful when working on a website project, for example, when preparing a site prototype. Okay, let's move to the JavaScript part where the real fun begins. Where do we start? Of course, by selecting these two elements using the query selector method and putting them in variables. Do you remember how to do it? I'll save the image in the variable img and the link in the variable link. Great, let's start with the getAttribute method. It's the simplest. How to use it? Just add it after the variable with a dot and in parentheses, in quotes, type the attribute you're interested in. Do you want to know the value of the image's src attribute? Let's check it in the console. I type console.log. Inside I type the variable img and after the dot, the getAttribute method. In parentheses, I type the attribute name in quotes, which is src. As you can see, we have the address placeholder.com/150 in the console. Okay, let's now check the ID. We get the information that it is my image. Great! Everything works as it should. Let's see what happens if we ask for an attribute the element doesn't have. For the image, let's check its class. In such a case, we simply get null. Alright, you know how the getAttribute method works. Let's do something more fun. Let's play with the setAttribute method. With it, we can take any attribute and change it. We can also add one if the element doesn't have it. First, let's add a class to the image. We already know that the img element doesn't have a class attribute. We even checked it with the getAttribute method. To add an attribute, we type the setAttribute method after the dot. Here, however, there's something new. We will type two values separated by a comma, and each of them must be in quotes. The first value we type is the name of the attribute we want to change. The second value after the comma is the value of that attribute. For example, the class attribute and its value, let's say, images. We don't need to show this in the console. This time we will check with the inspector to see if the class with the value images appears for the img element. And indeed, it does. It worked. This way we can add or change attributes. Cool, right? Let's also see what happens when we try to change an attribute that already exists and has a value. For example, let's change the src attribute. I will change it to a larger image size, 500 pixels instead of 150. If the image gets bigger, it means the setAttribute method worked correctly and we successfully changed the value of an existing attribute. What do you think? Will it work? Will the image get bigger? Let's check. Yes, it worked. So we can change existing attributes. We have one more method left, remove attribute. As its name suggests, we use it to remove an attribute. Let's remove the target attribute from the anchor tag. If we click the anchor tag, we will be taken to a new page. And take a look, it's interesting. I entered the address as example.com and it turned out to be a real page. So the website at this address exists and we can use this address as an example. Okay, let's get back to removing attributes. How will we know if we successfully removed the target attribute? The link should open in the same window, right? Let's check it. For the remove attribute method, it looks similar to getAttribute. Inside we simply enter the attribute name. So I enter link, then a dot, and after the dot remove attribute. Inside I enter target as the attribute to be removed. It's time to test if it worked. I'm clicking the link and it works. The example.com page opened in the same window. To be sure, let's check with the inspector to see if the target attribute is gone. And indeed it is. Only the ID and href attributes remain. Good job! To sum up, look at the slide now. We have three methods for manipulating attributes. The first is getAttribute. With it, we can check an attribute's value. Inside, we simply enter the attribute name. The second method is setAttribute. It is a bit more complex than the others because we provide two things: the attribute name and the value we want to assign to it. We use it to change or add an attribute. The last one is the removeAttribute method, which we use to remove attributes. In this case, we provide only the attribute name we want to remove. Attribute manipulation is a powerful and practical tool in web development. You must have both clothes online at some point. You've probably seen a photo gallery on the product page more than once. At the bottom, under the main image, are small images. We call them thumbnails. When you click on one of them, that image gets bigger. This is a great example of using attribute replacement. In this case, the img elements src attribute is changed to the one you clicked. Now it's time to move on to something even more interesting: creating and removing entire elements in the DOM. With JavaScript, we can create something from nothing in the DOM. What do I mean? We can create HTML elements without manually changing anything in the HTML code. How does it work? Let me introduce you to another great method of the document object, the createElement method. The name is easy to remember, right? It's time to show you an example on CodePen. Let's go back to the example with the image and link. Let's say I want to create another element under the anchor tag, like a paragraph. I can use the createElement method for this. I'll create a new paragraph and save it in a variable, let's say paragraph. In the parentheses of the createElement method, we simply give the tag name in quotes. In this case, it will be P. Alright, done. Now let's see what this variable is in the console. Do you see? We have an opening and closing P tag. That's what we wanted. One thing still needs to be added. This element is empty so far. Let's add some text to it. I saved this element in a variable to modify it later using JavaScript. Do you remember how we can change or add text to an element? Yes, it's the text content property. Using it, I'll change the content of our paragraph to text like "I am a paragraph." Now let's check in the console how our element looks. Yes, now we have opening and closing tags and text in the middle. Great, our element is ready. But notice that we have the paragraph in a variable so far. I still need to put it in the HTML. It's not on the page yet. I can only display it on the console to see how it looks. I need to add it to the HTML now. We'll use another method for this time called append. In the case of the append method, the rule is that we write it on the element we want to add to, and in the parentheses, we provide the element we want to insert into the DOM. For example, if I want to put our paragraph into the body element, we write it like this. The body is a child of the document element. To access it, I need to write the document element first, then the body element after the dot. Then I put a dot, write the append method, and write our paragraph in parentheses. Let's see if it worked. Yes, the paragraph appeared in the browser window. We just added our first element to the DOM. As you probably noticed, we can write several things after several dots. document.body.append and so on. The document.body notation is quite common. This way you can access the content of a web page. It is very useful and worth remembering. Let's see what's under the document.body. Let's check it in the console. We have the opening tag of the body element here. Great. Inside there's an image, a link, some script from CodePen, and finally the paragraph we added. Remember that the append method always adds the element at the end. If I wanted the paragraph to be together with the image and link, adding a div containing these elements would be a good idea. Then the paragraph would be under the link and the CodePen script would be at the very end. Thanks to the append method, you can freely add elements, even more than one at a time. It is important to remember that it always adds these elements at the end of the parent element. Okay, you know how to add an element, but how do you remove it? The remove method I mentioned earlier comes to the rescue. It works a little differently than the append method. In the case of the remove method, we don't write anything in the parentheses. We simply write it after the dot, following the name of the element we want to remove. For example, I'll remove the image from the page. To do this, I write the variable name where I saved it, img. Then after the dot, I write the remove method. And the image disappeared from the page. Great, right? What's more, I can also remove the entire page. I remove everything if I write document.body and remove. To add an element to the DOM, we use first the createElement method to create a new element. We specify the elements tag in parentheses like a paragraph or div. Then, by changing the text content property, we can add text inside the new element. Of course, we can also improve this new element with new attributes, such as src in the case of an image, or add a class or ID. When the element is ready, it's time to add it to the page. To do this, we use the append method. We use it on the element to which we want to add the new element and write it in the parentheses. For example, if you want to add a new image inside an existing div, the code should look like the one on the slide. If we need to remove an element, we must first save it in a variable and then use the remove method on it. Okay, you've learned a lot about DOM manipulation, so it's time for a summarizing task. To consolidate new knowledge, you need to practice, so don't skip the exercises. You now have one shorter exercise and in the next video a slightly bigger one summarizing the entire day's learning. And here's the task for you. Imagine you are a powerful witch. You have your magic book in which you keep all your spells. However, you want to tidy it up. First of all, you want to add a new spell that you recently learned. You also want to remove another one that you don't use at all. Also, you want the spell list to match the style of the book. Here's what you need to do. In CodePen, I've prepared a draft version of the spellbook for you. You'll find the HTML and CSS code already written here. As you can see, one of the spells has an ID called remove spell. This will be the spell that you will need to remove. Your next task will be to add a new spell. It's about the spell named teleportation. You'll create the spell and add it at the end of the list. Remember to add it inside the list, inside the UL element. Don't add it to the body because it will be outside the book. Finally, your task will be to add the class named spellList to the UL element. After all these changes, you should get the spellbook to look the same as you see it on the slide. And of course, you will do all this using JavaScript and the methods learned today. You can't change anything in the HTML or CSS section. Now you're only interested in the JavaScript code section. You'll find the CodePen link below the video. Remember to click the fork option to create your own copy. You have 3 tasks to complete. To do so, you need the methods discussed in this video. If you face any problems, feel free to watch it again. Are you ready? Pause the video and get to work! I hope you did great with this job. It's time to discuss the solution. Let's start with the simplest thing, removing the invisibility spell. This element has an ID called remove spell. Thanks to this, we can easily find it in the DOM and save it in a variable. So first, I created a variable called remove spell. Using the query selector method, I selected this element. Here, remember the hash sign at the beginning. This is an ID, so we write it with a hash. Then I use the remove method on this variable with the saved remove spell element, which removed this element. The first task is complete. Now it's time for the second, more difficult one. To add a new spell, we first need to create it using the createElement method. As you can see, I created a new li element, like the other spells, and saved it in a new spell variable. As you probably remember, initially, the new element only had opening and closing tags. So we needed to add text with the spell's name, right? I do this by changing the text content property to teleportation. Great. The element is ready. We just need to add it to the DOM. We'll do this using the append method. With this method, however, we must also specify which element we want to insert the new spell in. Remember, I don't want to insert it into the body. Why? Look what happens when I do this. The new spell appears outside the book. That's not what we want. All list elements should be inside the UL element, the unordered list. So I need to find it in the DOM and save it in a variable. I'll name it spellList. Now I can write spelllist.append and I write the new spell in the parentheses. Great! This time the spell appeared in the right place. The second task is completed. We have the last one yet, adding the spellList class to the unordered list. As you can see, we already have this element saved in a variable. I'll use it and use the setAttribute method on this element. Remember, here we provide 2 things: the attribute we want to change and its value. The attribute will be the class and its value will be the name spellList. And all done. See how great the spellList looks now. You will also find a link with the ready solution under this video. If you completed all 3 tasks on your own, congratulations, great job! Okay, that's all for this episode. However, you need to know that you won't make your website more interactive with just DOM manipulation. Yes, you learned how to change elements, their styles, text, etc. But you will experience the true power of this new knowledge tomorrow. We will deal with events. In tomorrow's lessons, we will fully interactively manipulate the web page. Remember the example with the photo gallery in the online store? When you click on a thumbnail, that photo appears larger. But you won't make this type of photo gallery today. Yes, you know how to change attributes. However, it's still not enough. With JavaScript events, you can write code to change the image attribute and decide when to do it, such as when the user clicks on the photo. It's a very interesting topic, so I invite you to a day dedicated to events. Remember to do the summarizing exercise and see you tomorrow. Welcome to our summary exercise on functions and DOM manipulation. Now it's time to use everything you've learned today. You'll use them to transform a forgotten garden. When you go to the CodePen link provided under this video, you'll see a sad, ugly garden. The owner seems to have forgotten about it long time ago. The whole garden is gray, without grass, and full of weeds. Your job is to bring it back to life, making it beautiful and colorful. And here are your tasks. Each task should be completed as a function. Name the function, write the code inside, and remember to call it to make the changes. First, let's work on the garden's title. Right now it says, "Welcome to the dull garden" in gray. You will change this to "Welcome to the beautiful garden" and make the text color olive. Below the video, there's a list of color names you can use directly in your code. Browsers recognize 140 colors, so you have many to choose from. For example, black is just black and olive will be olive. Next, change the garden's background color from gray to green. This should be easy for you. The next task is a bit more challenging and you can do it in various ways. You will replace the weeds with new, beautiful flowers. This means you will change the styles of each flower. Here's how the flowers should look. The first flower will have a red background and be called rose. The second flower will be pink and called tulip. And the third flower will be orange and called sunflower. It's up to you how you handle this task. After dealing with the flowers, your fourth task is to add a new flower. It should be blue and placed next to the others. It should be called bluebell. It should have the same class name as the other flowers and an ID named flower4. Let's outline what you need to do. Change the garden's title to a new text and color. Change the entire garden's background color to green. Change the styles of the flowers so there are 3 colorful flowers instead of gray weeds. And add 1 new flower. All tasks should be done as functions. Define them and call them to see the changes. And here's the tip. Think about using parameters for some functions. Finally, the garden should look like this on the slide now. Get ready to start your garden adventure. Good luck and I'll see you in the solution video. Wow, that was a challenging mission, wasn't it? How did it go? Did you complete all 4 tasks? Let's go through the solution code step by step. In the first task, changing the title is pretty simple. I just saved the title in the variable. Remember, if you're selecting an element by its ID, you need to add a hash before the name. If you selected the element just by its tag h1, that's also fine since there's only one h1 on the page. Then I changed the text content property to the new text and the color to olive. This should all be inside a function named changeGardenTitle, clearly showing its purpose. Next, let's change the garden's background color to green. I created a function named changeGardenBackgroundColor. I started by finding the garden element by its ID, and changing its background color to green is easy. And remember to call the function. Okay, let's go to the task number 3. Here you might have created a separate function for each flower. If so, you probably did something like this. Create a function styleFlower1 to change the style of the first flower. Inside, find the flower by its ID and change its background color and text. And repeat for the second and third flowers. If you did it this way, that's totally fine. Everything works correctly and the flowers look as colorful as we wanted. While this works, it could be more efficient. Right now, you repeated the same code 3 times. Look closely. All 3 functions search for the element in the DOM and change the background color and text. The only things that change are the element's ID, color, and text, right? How can we improve this? We can use the knowledge about parameters and create a single function where only the arguments will change. This way, the function becomes universal and we avoid repeating the same code over and over. Here's how it should look. I simply named the function styleFlower. As its parameters, I put flower ID, color, and text. Then I used these parameters inside the function. Flower ID to search for the element using the query selector method, color to use as the new background color, and text to set the new text content. Now I can create 3 different flowers using the same function. How do I do it? By providing the proper values as arguments when calling this function. The first flower will have ID flower1 with a hash at the beginning. The color will be red and the name will be rose. I did the same with the remaining flowers. Thanks to this, we use the same function but with different arguments. If you didn't do it this way, don't worry. It takes some practice to improve your code. Oof, we have completed the 3rd task. The last thing left is to add a new flower. Again, we can do this in 2 ways. The first way is to create a function that adds a blue flower named bluebell. The second way is to prepare this function with parameters to create a universal way for adding flowers. Of course, the first method is very good here. Your task was to add only 1 flower. The second method would be great if, in the future, there would be a need to add even more flowers. Let's look at both methods. We'll start with the simpler one, adding this specific flower. I named this function addFlower4 because it will be the 4th flower. I created a new element, a new div, and placed it in the new flower variable. Then, using the setAttribute method, I added the class name flower and ID flower4. I changed its background color to blue and its name to bluebell. To put it into the garden, I first need to find and save the garden in a variable. Then, using the append method, I inserted it into the garden. Finally, I called this function. As you can see, the new flower appeared next to the sunflower. Now the garden looks really colorful. We can leave the code in this version, but we can also improve the addFlower method to be universal. Here's how. We should rename it to addFlower. As its parameters, we will put flower ID, color, and text. So far, it looks similar to the previous styleFlower function, right? Inside the function, we need to replace the code where flower ID, color, and text appear with the values from the parameters. Finally, when calling the function, we need to add 3 arguments. The ID will be flower4, the color will be blue, and the text will be bluebell. And here's a small note. As you can see, I didn't put a hash in the ID name. This is because we don't use the hash in the setAttribute method. In the styleFlower function, we had to add a hash at the beginning because the query selector method requires it. I hope this difference is clear. Phew, that was a big job. If you handle it, huge congratulations. If you still have some difficulties, go back and watch it again. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. It will be another day full of cool challenges. See you then!